Kris Radlinski. What a pleasure. MBE, we should say. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Been trying to get you on for years, and we finally got hold of you.
Yeah.
Like Gulliver's Travels, we've pinned you down.
Well, we're nothing to talk about, so I thought, why not?
Fill the space.
How worried are you that we're going to talk about those things you don't want to talk about?
Oh, listen, I'm prepared. When I found it last week, I spent the weekend reading up. So
no comment.
No, it's not going to be that. There may be a bit of that, but I always, I don't know, it's become a bit of a cliche now. I always think the best place to start in a podcast is the beginning. So going back to little Kris.
Yes.
You were a hometown boy, Wigan, joined them in 1993. Those years leading up to you taking rugby league seriously and thinking I'm going to make a profession out of this. What were they like for you?
Well, obviously, I grew up in Wigan in the glory days. You know, every summer we'd head to Wembley because it's what you did as part of the town. You know, that illustrious team that won so many Challenge Cups, and it was the sport that kids played in the playground. You know, many days I'd go home from school with holes in my pants and things like that. That's what kids did in Wigan. It was very much geared to playing for the team. So that's what I always wanted to do. It's what every boy in Wigan wanted to do, and I was lucky enough to work hard to achieve it. So it was just expected as part of a Wigan kid, really.
Was it forced that you were always going to do it? Was it unrealistic at times that you would make it?
It certainly wasn't forced, but it was. It's not one of these where only a couple of guys would play. Every mate you had would play rugby league, so it was very much part of the journey. I never considered myself to be a natural rugby player. You know, a long way from that.
In what way?
Well, there was. I wasn't talented, but I had work ethic. You know, I worked hard. There were a lot more talented players than me, and a lot stronger, a lot faster, etc. But I'm pretty comfortable knowing that I got to where I got through hard work, and there are always a lot of more skillful and talented, better people around me. But no one could doubt how hard I worked.
When you joined Wigan then, and obviously in '93, and all those people that you'd watched going to Wembley, you're suddenly surrounded with, and on the training ground and just around in the evening having beers. What was that like, suddenly being part of that illustrious club? For excuse the pun.
Yeah, look, it was incredible times. If you list some of the names of the people in the changing rooms, Martin Afire, Sean Edwards, Jason Robinson, Andrew Farrell, the list of players was incredible. So.
It's ridiculous, that squad, wasn't it? That
ridiculous.
Team at that time was ridiculous.
It's the reason I supported Wigan when I was a kid.
Oh,
yeah.
Says it all, doesn't it?
But this was before salary cap, obviously. So they could spend whatever they want, and probably only a couple of younger players will get fed into the top squad each year. And I was probably me and Simon Horton at the time. I don't know if you remember Simon.
Yeah.
So he went into this squad, and it's a pretty daunting place to be with all, at the time, I probably had 15, 20 internationals, but it was a tremendous learning experience for me. You were learning off the very, very best in the country.
How did you carry yourself at that time then, walking in around those guys?
Well, look, a rugby league changing room is a tough environment in the best of times. When you're walking in as a pale kid with red hair into
Even worse.
into a changing room with Kelvin Scarrett,
the red hair,
Neil Gower,
Chris, the red hair's gone these days.
Pardon?
The red hair's gone.
Well,
these
there's
days.
a lot more grey,
bit more
but
auburn.
I look back, it was bright orange back in the day, on this.
You've not been on the Just for Men, have you?
No.
Things change, don't they, Will?
Oh,
Things change.
Yeah.
Your teeth are whiter than they were
They
3 weeks
are,
ago.
Scholes has got less ginger in his older years as well,
Well,
hasn't he?
then maybe we're talking about the aging process. The subconscious thing, what you're trying to
Age
suggest
is good for gingers, essentially.
Absolutely, that's what I think so. But to your point, this young kid walking into a changing room with big characters,
Yeah.
that is character building. Put
Yeah.
it that way.
It's ruthless, that environment, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it
It
was.
finds you out quick.
Yeah.
If you can't deal with it, you're gone.
And a lot of what was said at the time was surviving the training pitch and the game day was one thing. Surviving the changing room, that's another.
Yeah.
That's another.
Well, go on then. So let's name some names here. When you walk in there, what sort of how?
Who do you
test-
avoid?
How,
Yeah.
yeah.
Who
How
do you
testing
avoid?
was it, and who do you stay away from?
I wouldn't say you stay away from everybody. So you've got to have thick skin, and you've got to buy into these guys at the same breath would absolutely. Give the life for you.
Yeah.
You're going on to field with these blokes, and you create, really special bonds. Martin Fire, who was, probably the biggest superstar in the game at the time, he was the guy who would always relate to the younger kids, and and even to this day, we chat like weekly about things. So perhaps there was a tough crew of Neil Cowie and Kelvin Skerrett and people like that. You tend to learn things off Andrew Farrell and Dennis Betts, who were amazing professionals and probably ahead of the time at that era.
Isn't that strange though? The ones with the most talent are the ones who are probably the nicest ones who are willing to help, whereas actually the ones who can make it awkward are the ones with the loudest bark and the ones with more insecurities at the time,
Yeah,
because O'Fire was as good as it got.
Oh, he was a superstar. I still remember he had this like dusky pink convertible Mercedes. And he turned, I mean, it's the kind of car you'd see, going down Rodeo Drive in LA, and he's rocking through the streets of Wigan.
You got to back yourself to drive one of those, haven't you?
But this guy was like, that's the one I wanted. This is superstar standing. Very un-rugby league. But
go on then. What was your first car? When you got that first contract, what was the first car?
I was a Nova SR. Yeah, it was a Nova SR.
That's quite quick.
Yeah.
That's pretty
It was all right, 1.3.
1.3. 0 to 60.
No, but like I said, I'm incredibly lucky to be in this changing room full of superstars. Yeah, great start for me anyway.
Was that time in the game? Look, where Wigan was so dominant, Chris, and it was amazing. I imagine for a young lad in Wigan, was that a challenging time for the game? You know what I mean? Wigan's dominance. I think it's often spoken about, like that period of where Wigan just dominated everything for a long period. What's your sort of view on that?
Well, I mean, they were probably one of the only professional teams at the time, weren't they?
Yeah.
And when I look back at some of the games now, and with no offence, I look at some of the opponents who they were playing against. It's probably no reason why they were successful. Wigan had full-time training environment, incredible professionals, and they were playing against part-time guys, really. And I'm not suggesting that it's because they were part-time, but it had to have a factor.
Yeah.
To. But I didn't see it as a worrying time for the game when you consider, the crowd numbers back then were absolutely through the roof.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it? Because we're striving for more of an even playing field with salary caps and all the rest of it. But rugby league was at its biggest when we had one dominant team, and that was Wigan. And it was, everyone knew Wigan, everyone knew the players. It was on box office TV at the time. So it's weird that we're looking for this level playing field, but then in terms of growing the game. But then when the game was at its biggest, we had one dominant team that they had household names throughout the squad.
Yeah, no, and Wigan, like you said, drove standards, professionalism, training methods. A lot of that stuff filtered not only into rugby league, but then into rugby union, stuff that was pioneered by Wigan at that time. So having people who are pushing the standards is a great way to elevate the standards of everybody, in the competition. And Wigan's methods at that time certainly did that. But who led that? Who was in charge of that full-time setup and the professionalism behind it all?
Well, probably the guy on a daily basis will be Sean Edwards.
Yeah.
He would take over sessions, biggest voice.
As a player, he'd be running the sessions.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely, yeah. He would. I mean, we went through sessions where a ball wouldn't get dropped. And if you did, he's pretty moody. He'd walk in a different direction. He wouldn't speak to you. He'd let you know. It was a tough environment for that. But then you could see Andrew Farrell then, who was probably 21, and he wasn't scared of anybody. He would stand up to people. He would drive standards. So out of the whole squad, it was them two who, through that era, really took the club to a different.
He was Great Britain
dimension.
captain at that age, wasn't he, Faz?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
That's something, isn't it? To be 21 years old and captain of your country.
He was massive. He was massive, and he had presence. And we'd go to some away grounds, on rainy days in Yorkshire, and all the crowd would be in at him, and he would absorb it all, and he'd actually take pressure off the rest of the team.
Yeah, it's massive.
And he was part of his character. He was, when you had him in your team, you're okay.
So no coincidence those two guys have gone on and been very successful coaches then in your mind.
Not coincidence at all. Two of the. No, they've had big gigs throughout the world of rugby, and I can completely see why.
So when you'd got your feet under the table at this slick machine that was Wigan Warriors back in the sort of early 90s, was there a thinking that you wanted to be a one-club man even then? Why would you ever leave?
I never set off on that journey of being a one club man, but I got into the team. I was happy in life. It was where I wanted to be, and there was an opportunity came to go to rugby union, and it I can remember one Sunday night where it was me, my mum, and my dad talking about it, and whereas your dad's a bit different to your mum in that respect. So,
This was pre-Robbo as well. Maybe.
Yeah. Think of the future and all that, and mum's think of your happiness and all this kind of stuff. But you reflect. I was playing for number one. I was playing number one for Wigan. I was in a nice place in my life, and I didn't want to change it. So I never would say it was part of my long-term kind of ambition, but it just worked out that way.
You must have been tempted. I mean, especially when you see Andy Farrell going and Robert going later, but obviously before you had the chance to do it. I mean, do you think you could have adapted as well as they did?
I don't know. I've never played the game. I played once against Bath when we played them, but I'd never played rugby union. I went to Manchester Airport and I met Clive Woodward and we had a chat there, and it came down to one evening, yes or no, really. So it was a close one. Is there an element of regret there? There's probably a little bit of maybe experiencing something different. What I think, it's not just the sport; it's the travel, it's meeting new people, it's everything. And I think if that choice would have come up a bit again, I might have considered it differently.
It is interesting how some of those moves work out and some really don't, and for various different reasons. And we've had Sam Burgess on the podcast as well, but I imagine at the time Clive would have been giving it all the kind of and building up to a World Cup cycle, and would have been building up to the 2003 World Cup as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, look, it was tremendously flattering at the time, and he sold a great vision to me, but it just come down to where I was, and I wouldn't say comfortable, but it was where I was happy, and that's that's the route I chose.
Did you think then, when you were, as you put it, the at the time, the small, big-haired ginger kid in this Wigan team, that you would be not only staying there as one club, because we've gone over that, but going into being an executive director, and before that a general manager under Michael Maguire?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, when I finished, I had a bit of time away from the game. My chairman, who's the chairman and owner now, he was at London. And he actually met me. He got the train up to Wigan, and that's what I go and play at London. And this was after I was retired, and it's just something I didn't want to do. And then he said, "Well, will you come down and work for me in London?" And again, it just wasn't the right time. And then when he came to Wigan and took over, then he actually gave me a job. And I said, "Doing what?" And he said, "We'll work it out as we go along."
Was that 2008?
It was about 6 months before Michael Maguire came. Yeah,
2009.
I think you were just.
Yeah, I was there.
You was there, yeah.
Well, Mark, you've got a story about Chris, haven't you?
No, I
He's telling me a story in the car on the way over.
All right.
Because I said, were you sort of around the club when?
This is the most underwhelming story ever.
Most
Go
of them
on.
are.
You built it up now.
Go on, this is
built it up now.
Basically, Will said, "Do you know any stories on Chris?" I said, "Well, we crossed paths briefly when I was at Wigan."
Is that it?
No.
Nearly,
It
nearly.
gets slightly
Yeah,
better.
it gets a bit better.
Said, "What happened?" I said, "Well, I played quite well for the reserves," and Chris said, "Well played."
That's as good as it gets.
And tune in next week.
Who wouldn't want Mark Flanagan as their best man?
It's funny, I keep getting asked. I said he was going to be bad. You played Salford and I played quite well, and Chris said, "Well played."
But before we get into the world of being a director, because I'm fascinated with how that transition has happened for you, how much do you think the game has changed then from those, early mid-90s, early noughties? And I'm thinking even back to the Saints Wigan derby. You were on the pitch together with the big brawl, Wilkin, that you started.
When Wilkin got filled in.
I got filled in by Terry Newton.
I was nowhere. I played. I was nowhere near it.
But when if you try and sum that up of just because games and sports do evolve, don't they? Over almost now 2 decades.
Yeah. Well. It wouldn't have been too long ago. Maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago. We had a game in Yorkshire, and I drove back, and at that night there was a classic TV, a game on TV, and it's from 1994, and we were playing Leeds at Headingley, and I weren't actually playing in the game, but I watched it, and it was fast as anything.
Really?
Yeah, there was no wrestle on the floor.
Control at all.
There was nothing. when a player made a tackle, they put their hands up because they were afraid of getting penalised, and it was relentless. And obviously, we're getting to technical aspects of the game, but when it is like that, there just appear to be holes everywhere. Late retrievers and all kinds of stuff. And I really enjoyed watching it. It was fascinating on the back of what I'd just witnessed, which was an arm wrestle game, which was really tight. And it's probably 25 years separating the games, but massive difference.
And we've got a responsibility to entertain. Will, like sport is it's entertainment, right? And we've got to be conscious that the performance side of sport's not that entertaining. It's not that sexy, is it? The competitive way of slowing games down, of winning, can not be entertaining. I think we need to acknowledge that there's a way to win games and it not be entertaining. Whereas in the past, it was like a lawless sort of environment where anything was possible, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think if someone said to me what has changed over the last 15, 20 years, a lot of it would be the analysis of the sport as well.
Yeah,
coaches know if you hit 3 or 4 KPIs in a game, there's a good chance you'll win it. But what that does is create low percentage plays.
KPIs are boring, aren't they?
Absolutely.
If you're talking in
but it might keep a coach in a job flash.
Yeah, exactly.
Has the game become more robotic then, like that in recent years? Has it become more, as some of the romance been sucked out of it that was there in the 90s?
Well, I think the creative players, the Sean Longs, the Lee Breers, the guys who would probably try things off the cuff. Perhaps we have players now who can do all these skills, no doubt, but potentially they don't do them in the game because there's a lot at stake, isn't there? Winning the game, people in employment.
Defensive are too good, aren't they?
Yeah,
especially when the influx of the ideas around from the NRL with wrestle and the structure around defensive players. Like unless you get a quick play of the ball, or you've worked your middles over, or you've got a slight overlap on one side, you're not going to break a defence down. So it's so much harder to break a defence down and to score points these days.
But with these players now, who I believe have got this technical ability to do it, it's a great opportunity. If you've got the guts to try something off the cuff, and you make a name for yourself, you'll be a superstar.
Yeah, guys who can play now are a commodity, aren't they? Look at some of the things Aidan Caesar does when he plays, and just some of the times he plays, I think, wow, this is great. But
Bevan French has been.
Yeah, exactly. Same. There's loads of people who can do it, but you said when the stats and the spreadsheet that says you do this, this, and this equals W, if it doesn't equal that, you're discouraged from doing it through the week. So it's no surprise maybe we don't see that flamboyant sort of style anymore, because there is a formula to win games. And, the teams that are now the plucky underdogs will just try and complete pretty high, stay in a game and try and jag one. While maybe in the past they'd have just waz the ball around a bit and see what happened. But I don't think there's a lot of teams do that. It's like Tony Smith's side last year stood out like dog's balls because they just started doing crazy stuff, which actually, when you look back in the game, there's probably things that were happening in the history of the game, but they've gone out of it. But yeah, it's an interesting time. That time... and I saw this at the start of my career, although a lot later than when you started, Chris, was that transition from old school to new school. Do you know when you've got those old characters in the dressing room and you can just feel it changing and, Andy Farrell's maybe more professional and that just pulls it away from the old school. And that was something I felt, like the start of my career, I was at Hull KR and obviously moved to St Helens, but that feeling that the game was pulling away from the old the old school.
Well, I think it's almost military, wasn't it? You do this, you hear that at this time, you eat this, you do that. And I think probably the modern workplace doesn't really support that anymore. It's a lot more about well-being and emotional intelligence and having conversations with players and educating. That's a lot more in certainly in our setup than has ever been.
And that didn't exist in your day?
Oh, no. You do this, you hear at this time. If you're not, you find this amount. Now it's a lot more listening and talking and getting to know players on different levels, which is the modern workplace, and rugby clubs are not immune from that.
For someone then who's played in so many spicy Saints Wigan derbies, bearing in mind he's sat next to Jon Wilkin it's COVID safe, isn't it? You're 2 meters apart,
it's
just
fine.
about. What does that rivalry mean to you?
Look, it's amazing, and I think it's a real jewel in the crown of British sport. Really, it's one of these games which never really disappoints. Everybody, even from outside the sport, look forward to a Wigan Saints game. It's blood, it's passion, it's everything on the line. And I think people who take part in it, they understand that and they treasure it, to be honest. You know, I think I played in around about 40 of the games, and I consider myself very, very lucky. And I love the fact that I can say I've played in them games because they are, in my mind, the epitome of sport. It's everything on the line. And I can go to St Helens now and I can have great relationships with St Helens fans. Some of the St Helens players who have been probably the best players of the Super League era, James Roby, Longy, for example, you know, they're the people I look up to as well. So it means a lot to me, and I think it means a lot to the game as well.
Was it always as friendly though? Come on, back in those 90s days, you must have stayed away from each other, bearing in mind, you know, you see each other on nights out. Was it as sort of tribal as I'd imagine it to be?
You see each other on nights out.
No, but you know, like that. But that's what used to, you know, Liverpool and United players in the sort of, you know, in the 90s.
That was never there though, was it? You know, if you saw someone from, you'd have a beer with them. There's something about the sport. Look, when there was obviously the big fight with Scully and Faz, it's iconic, isn't it? It's epic, and but it stays there. You know, it stays on the field, and that's what I love about the sport as well. You know, I've had some unbelievable games against Saints, and we need to cherish them. Yeah,
and leave that aggression is part of the sport, and you know, sometimes I think we leverage the sport as being a family sport, but it is built on aggression and physicality. And you look at the most watched clips of rugby league, and you know, Ben Flower hitting Lance High is one, rightly or wrongly, it's one of the most watched clips. That fight on Good Friday in 2004, people like to see that aggression and the combative nature. The beauty of rugby league is, as Kris rightly says, that's where it stays, that's where it finishes. There's a white line on the edge of the pitch, and everybody who's watching and the players who are taking part know that what happens on that rectangle there is just a sealed event, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, it's done.
But those moments, and you'll know from being a director, that is the huge attractive nature of its marketability, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, you mentioned being a director, the Friday before the 2014 grand final, which is the Ben Flower incident, that is when the chairman arranged the Skype with me. No, I've never done a Skype. This is a video call, and he came on the screen and he had his shirt and tie on and thought something was happening. And that's when he asked me to be a director on that night. And he told me not to tell anybody. And then the weekend kind of erupted because of what happened with Ben and Lance.
Baptism of fire.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So, and we had to, we were dealing with things we've never had to deal with before. Like, Piers Morgan was commenting on it. And they were pulling clips from changing room conversations that Wayne had done, etc. And
Which is great at the same time, though.
It's probably the best publicity we've ever had. It's madness. But we almost had to change our communications on the back of it. We couldn't say that Wigan and Saints hate each other. We had to, it actually become pretty sterilised in the build up to Wigan Saints games because of what happened.
Yeah, there was a bit of like joint communication, wasn't there? From both clubs.
Yeah, we had a coffee, didn't we?
Yeah. It was like both clubs have got. We're gonna. We need to tone this down. That was what the set, but then, just in the short term.
Yeah, but then I went to, I was very lucky enough to go to Origin. And I was in Sydney on the morning of an Origin game. And, the Sydney Morning Herald, front page, back page, it's all about we hate them. Paul Gallen, I absolutely hate these guys. And it's the most watched sport in Australia. It all sold out all over. Or every game, and it's all over the world. People are watching it, and I'm like, that's why people love it. It's gladiatorial. It gets the blood flowing. So it's sometimes we perhaps we sterilise it too much. I think there's obviously a lot going on in the NRL at the moment with the head high tackles and the executive Peter Vlandis coming out and saying that they need to look at the bigger picture and concussion, etc. And the fans are just kicking off because they love the raw element of the game.
Well, the game lies in this seam between welfare and safety of athletes and the litigation that could come off the back of that lack of preparation to deal with concussive injuries, with, long-lasting injuries, and then the entertainment of the aggression and the violence. Rugby league's violent. Like, say what you like, it's aggressive and it's violent, and people enjoy that, and we can't get away from that. But there's this little seam in between, and we're trying to work out what's right and what's wrong, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we're constantly nibbling away at the aggression and tweaking. And one of my worries is that an example would be when you start playing the game, the risks of playing the game. Did I not understand the long-term effects of concussive injuries? No, but I knew the risks. I knew that it's dangerous. And there's got to be, I think,
Do you
a
think
balance.
rugby league over here and in the NRL are worried that the court cases that have been going on in the NFL, there's certain rugby union players, I know there's a Welsh guy, can't remember his name, who retired recently he had quite serious head injury.
Yeah.
They're worried about the court cases that might come in the future. That's why they're covering their own arse with the protocol.
I've no doubt.
Yeah.
I've no doubt.
Yeah.
And it's a factor, and there's the long-term health of players as well. But I mean, you yourself, Flash, one of the big parts of your game was give him a big rap here. He could hit people.
Bang people,
you got the headlines when Ben Flower knocked out Lance Hyatt. They did the same thing. They paid Ben Flower to do that to you. He knocked you out last season, didn't he?
He did, actually.
But it's a big part of your game, wasn't it, Flash?
Yeah.
You were known for
Well, I wasn't always, like you said before, I wasn't always the biggest or fastest or more skillful, but I just tried really hard. So I made a game on sprinting off my line, trying to put big hits on people. And usually it worked. Sometimes I got knocked out, but I wouldn't have made a career unless I could do that. So it plays on my mind sometimes that you don't want to get to 50 and 60 and start forgetting your memory loss or the rest.
Don't play rugby league then.
Well, I know. But when I was 20, I didn't realise that. But I'm not blaming the game. I'll still, if that happens, that's fine.
But that's how the game has a
saying.
responsibility now to look after players, isn't it? I mean, if you compare it to football, and I know you can't always do that, obviously with the nature of the game, but when you look at what's happening in football with players who've played in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the links to dementia.
Sports are always playing catch up to the implications of the sport that you play, aren't they?
Yeah.
So we didn't understand head injuries 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But now we're playing catch up. And the temptation is when you're playing catch up is to go further the other way than you need to. And I believe that that's why this period that we're in for the rule makers of the game is important, because the temptation is to nibble back too far the other way, and that ultimately will affect the product.
It becomes sterile, and you're lost. You don't know where you're at.
And that's what I'm saying. We're in an interesting time right now. The NRL's testing a few things. There's a bit of backlash about what's going on. I think we usually follow suit to some degree, don't we? And I think we've got to get this bit right, And in terms of, sort of the leadership of the game, I think it's a big time.
But it will become impossible to ignore scientific evidence when it comes to surface, won't it? Because that will just be deemed completely irresponsible for the people running the game.
Yeah, without doubt. I think look, we're in a period where we've never had more information, and much like Kris was, saying about the performance side of the game, it's ultimately like a formula. It's almost like AI type stuff. Is you put these numbers in, and at the end you win. Well, there's all this information about everything is out there, and when we're still making sense of it, we don't understand it. We still don't understand concussion, and all of that stuff. But we're just trying to get ahead of it, aren't we? And I think there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And I think we don't know what that is or what that looks like yet. And I don't think the game knows what that looks like.
Kris, what are the biggest challenges of being a director at a Super League club?
Well, look, I don't think it's going to get any more difficult than what we've just gone through last year. That was nothing could have ever have prepared us for the pandemic and the impact that it had on the game. We're a sport that relies heavily on people coming watching, people buying merchandise, people coming buying hospitality. And when all that's taken away, we're not like football where we have the resources to pay all this money. So what we had to go through last year was as tough as it's going to get. So I'm hopeful that that's prepared me for better days, should I say.
But if it was tough for you, I imagine it's a lot tougher for Wakefield and for the teams who don't have huge benefactors.
But then you say that, but I actually do think, sorry, Kris, on that, the biggest teams have got the biggest burden, haven't they? Yeah. They've got the bigger wage bills. They've got, facilities that need paying for, training facilities that need updating, You know, whereas some of the smaller clubs, but this might sound weird, I think COVID was not that bad for them. You know, as in, I don't think it was all that bad for them. I think in the long run it will be.
Well, don't forget as well that people who own sporting clubs, they have other business interests as well, which were not immune from being affected. So, look, we were dealing with things we'd never dealt with before. Nobody had ever heard of the word furlough.
Yeah.
And I had to phone every player individually and said, have you heard of the word furlough? What do you mean? What do you mean? And then, you know, social distancing and, you know, one of the toughest thing I ever did was on my own on a Zoom call with 35 players who drilled me on every single bit of the finances and absolutely asked every question I would ask, and I had to have every answer. And the only way I could not survive and get out of that was to give full transparency on the business and how it had been affected. But, you know, having one conversation with a rugby player is difficult. Having 35, you know, drilling you, it was for 2.5 hours.
So that's the toughest moment in your executive career. That's the toughest point.
Yeah. I think it will be easier to have now because this was early on in the pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, this was when we were just getting to grips with it. As the year went on, people probably understood the effect that it had on the business more, and I think I would be better equipped to deal with it now. But it was very fluid, wasn't it? And we were unsure whether crowds were going to come back.
Did you think it was close to a lot of clubs folding? Do you think it was
100%?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for government support, if it wasn't for fans donating season ticket money, most clubs would be under. No doubt about that. It was, and you know, I was telling players this, and I think they understood it, but you're also fighting for your wage and for your own kind of needs as well. So that's as challenging as it could have got.
Your day to day then as a director, it looks like what?
Well, I guess it's very reactive. As you know, there's the running of the business, whether that's marketing the games or season ticket or retail, and then there's probably nowadays the rugby is maybe 10% of what I deal with. I would always touch base with the coaches in the morning, see if anything needs to be done. I have conversations with the players and the medical staff, but my office is on the other side of the building, away from performance, and I work with a performance board that run the business. So it's very, very live. Things happen on a daily basis. You know, I have to deal with the RFL and the governance of the game and Super League and the marketing of the game. So it's pretty much everything.
We're all learning on the job in everything we do in life, aren't we? But you were given that kind of when you weren't ready, were you? You know, you had to prove to people you'd already done it as a player, prove people wrong, and kind of earn people's respect. But you then had to do that in a completely different way.
Absolutely. You know, I think I started on my second career, which was, you know, not playing, and I was just starting to learn the business. On day one, the chairman gave me full access to the finances of the club, and he just said, "Learn the business of the club."
That must have been fun, wasn't it? Just
yeah, absolutely.
and look back into the books back in the 90s.
This was the first day. You know, he trusted me. I had a friendship with him, and he gave me full access to it, and he just said, "Learn and develop, and let's see where you get to." So I worked with Michael Maguire and Sean Wayne, but then I guess I probably started to step away from the rugby side of it, more into the business side of it.
What do you think Ian Flanagan saw in you, Kris? What was it that he wanted, you know, to run the business that he saw in you?
Well, I think, you know, he'll openly say this. I don't think it's particularly me. I think he likes the qualities of a rugby league player. You know, they're hardworking, they're honest people. You know, they show integrity. And he trusted me from day one with his prized possession, which was, you know, his rugby club. And he knew that through conversations that I had with him that I had, you know, I was looking after his money as well. So, you know, I'm incredibly fortunate and thankful for the opportunity he gave me. And, you know, I consider him a really close friend now for doing it. And I'm no good to the chairman if I'm a yes man, and he likes the fact that I challenged him a little bit, and we had a few kind of disagreements along the way. And I think I've developed as a person through the journey. You know, I've had some unbelievable things to deal with over the years, and I feel really, really equipped. I'm better equipped than ever to deal with what's happening.
I think you would have been good for him as well, because Ian's always been a fan from when I've known him. He's been a rugby fan and a hugely successful businessman, but you having played for that club and been a player for such a long time, so you'd be able to marry the business sense that he's got, your experience playing and understanding players and the game. It's quite a good marriage, really, isn't it, in a business sense, to have you two together?
Yeah, look, I no doubt I learned an incredible amount from a business point of view, but I also you have to coach up as well. So I was probably giving him an insight into rugby, what he never really saw as a fan.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's really important. So I'd watch games with him, I'd sit next to him, and I would point things out which perhaps he hadn't seen. So I think we were both good for each other.
Yeah. The dynamic's fascinating, and you touched on it there, particularly with the furlough and things you guys have been through over the last 18 months. But you having to be that cutthroat director, making those decisions that which 20 years ago you were on the end of.
Yeah, June's a very, very difficult time in certainly in my year, because you have to have conversations with players on options, and you kind of start telling people what's happening next year. And my view on that is that if you're telling someone and it's a shock, then you've not done your work leading up to it. So it's a process of constant feedback, letting people know where they are, having honest conversations. And I'm friends now with a lot of players that we've let go, because you try and do it in such a way that it's not come as a shock, and you've not been disingenuous, you've not been dishonest with them. So
you make them see your thinking.
Yeah, and that's conversation, and that it's a lot more about emotional intelligence, I think, rather than I don't think I'll ever be the type of guy who says, "You're leaving, thank you very much." You have to kind of go through the process of explaining and getting them to understand why.
As a player, though, that never happened to you, did it? Do you know that conversation you're talking about there? So, a lot of the times in life we learn from maybe being through a situation.
Yeah.
Is that something you've really had to learn to deal with? Because you had probably ultimately really positive conversations.
Yeah, I get that. And a lot of what I do now is self-learning as well.
Yeah,
I've a lot of what I do is solving problems. I'd read loads. I'm reading one at the moment called Pig Wrestling. It's about how to solve problems.
Sounds like Jon Wilkin's childhood.
It does, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, two things you need to know about wrestling a pig is one, you're going to get dirty, and two, the pig enjoys it. So, but it's just about looking at different
Sounds like
ways.
Will's love life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking at different ways of problems and overcoming them, and I am I guess a scholar in that respect, where I do read and I do try and improve myself in that respect. But it's all learning on the job.
Does that come from Sean Wayne?
I have recommended the book to Wayne. Me and Wayne speak every week on stuff.
He's a big kind of, he enters every room with his little leather book, which he writes down everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And I had a really, really strong relationship with Sean, where he lives in a black and white world, and I'll deal with the massive grey bit in the middle. Which
He's very much in a black and white world, isn't he?
and it works. It was he's got real presence about him, Wayne, and I enjoyed working with him a great deal.
Yeah.
Just on that, I'm really interested in Wigan's culture, right? Because as an outsider looking in, they've got this unbelievable knack of producing gritty young men, or they seem to continually. I'd say since maybe Michael Maguire, maybe a bit before that, is produce like a band of gritty young men. Now, where does that come from the top? Is that from the performance department, or where does that come from?
I do think there's a thread that runs through the club. So a lot of the junior coaches have full access to everything what happens in the top squad. So all our coaches, who, whether you come as a volunteer or whether you're an academy coach who's paid, you can go and sit in a team meeting and understand the messages right at the top. I do think there is something in the DNA that we look for, that is that competitor. We spoke earlier about perhaps our current form, and I don't think we're playing at the standard we can play, but we're proving difficult to beat because of the tenacity that we've shown, and I think there is something in the character that we look like, and maybe it's in a recruitment as well that we look for that individual who refuses to get beaten. You know, when I'm watching a game with kids, I always look at the kid who drops the ball just to see what his next action is, whether he puts his hand up to take that ball, or the kid who chases back when there's a breakaway try and things like that. I try to look outside of it just to see perhaps the qualities, the intrinsic qualities rather than the skills.
Yeah, that's huge for me. But you know, that grittiness. We spoke with lots of people on the podcast who have developed grit, you know, through the career. But the evidence is there in young athletes, isn't it? I think Wigan probably as a club, I think, tend to recruit that gritty sort of, you know, young guy who's got that fire in his belly more than others.
We got Singo, you know, last year, and I always felt that he was our kind of player, and he's got that, hasn't he? He's just got that little bit about him.
And the young lads coming through, not even coming through it, Partington and Smithies, I think the last couple of years when they came onto the scene, they had that character that like they've been around for donkey's years, because that's the grit, that tenacity, that vigour in defence, that never say die attitude, and it's looked like they've been there for decades because that's the way they play.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ollie's hit 50 games now, and Morgan will hit 50 games in the next few weeks, and you know they're just competitors. You know, they're not the biggest guys, but they'll leave it all out there. Important to us, though, yeah.
Look, one of the big challenges you've had as well as a director, and I know it wasn't just solely your decision, it was the club's decision, was the rebranding. How, just looking back on, it's still quite fresh, has that all gone down?
Well, look, it's probably a 10-year process, really. We've probably been talking about it for 10 years. But then maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the Super League did a presentation to the clubs and did an individual audit, and the outcome of that was probably reaffirmed what we've been feeling for a long time, that the old badge was probably a little bit outdated and not in line with a lot of the leading sport franchises around the world. That
must be hard for you to say, though, for someone who's worn that badge of honour for so long.
Yeah, I understand it completely, though. You know, the badge has been amazing to me, and we always stress to people who signed for the club that they're representing the badge and everything that's gone before. So I understand the importance of the badge, but to me it was never about the badge. You know, it was more everything else what fell behind it, which was the standards, the culture, the marketing, the collateral. Everything that we did needed to be of a certain standard. So it was a process that, first of all, I'm incredibly proud of, because we went through a long 2-year consultation. There has to be learnings along the way. I think we could have perhaps involved a few more fans in the journey. We did have a section of them. I think we could have involved more.
How many were involved?
There was probably round about 12, I think, of, you know, men, women, young, old. There was an executive team, and I guess I was the face and I was the voice of it, because that's my job, which was challenging at the time. You know, one thing that happened the day we were launching on a Sunday night, and
midnight. Classic political technique.
Well, we were launching on a Sunday, but we trademarked it on a Saturday afternoon, and strategically for me, I took my missus out for a meal, because I knew it was going to be a tough ride. So I'm having a meal, and then my phone starts beeping, and obviously it's been leaked. I still don't know how it happened. And then I went to the toilet, and I came back, and she deleted my Twitter. So I've not been on it since. I've not been on it because I know I got a bit of a hard time on it. But I just know through what happened over the next few weeks is, you know, I was coming in the office, and the ladies, there'd be a treat on my desk and things like that, because I was getting absolute.
People mainly saying what?
They didn't understand the reason behind it. They didn't like it. Look, we went in it with our eyes wide open. I'm okay with people not liking the badge. You'd love everybody to like it. Yeah. My biggest problem would be if people didn't understand why we needed to change, why we needed to modernise, why we needed to be on the front foot with a digital agenda and seeing how people are consuming sport now. And it was that was the biggest challenge for me. I think now when I look back, I mean, the proof is in the pudding on whether people will buy it. You know, our retail numbers at the minute have been outstanding this year. We've hit our highest numbers since 2011, so it's worked to that degree. Our facility at the moment, that's, in my eyes, is where it all comes to light. We're very lucky that we've got the best facility in Super League. It's up there with Premier League standard. But when you come round the corner and you see it there, it all makes sense to me. You know, Dennis Betts came to see me and have a look around, and he said, I felt like I was walking into a Premier League club. It had real presence. But we'll never forget the old badge, you know.
Or you can rip that back out. Do you know what I mean? That's got like heritage. You know, you're doing heritage runs.
Yeah, you're selling a few more jerseys there.
Yeah.
Christmas special,
But
maybe.
absolutely. But you walk it. Look, it's all brand new, shiny. You walk into our facility, and on the right, we actually had some old seats from Central Park, so we've got them on the wall with a screen where you can watch clips from Central Park with the old badge. It'll always be there. It'll always be part of the club. You know, it's just, the other thing is just a badge, but everything behind it, the culture, how we work, how we drive each other, the fonts we use, the presentation, that is what a rebrand is to me.
I think a lot of rugby league clubs could maybe not rebrand the badge, but just take inspiration from pushing forward into the new era of sport, and whether that's the way it's marketed, the way we approach new fans, the way we send messages to fans, just get out there into the mainstream media is, I think, something that lots of other clubs, my old club Salford especially, could really take inspiration from, because fans aren't just going to turn up and just stumble on the DW Stadium and watch a game on a weekend. You need to get hold of them and embrace them, I think.
Yeah, and people are petrified of change, right? So regardless, you know, whatever you did was going to be criticised.
Yeah,
you know, for sure. And the people are just scared of taking that step. And look, you know, me and Mark did like a business course in Burnley, and we were talking about like the values of like rugby league, and one thing was the history and the heritage and all of these things that like drilled into us about how important they are.
To your man and woman on the street, that means a lot.
I get how important it is, but you can move on without forgetting your history and heritage. You can change and evolve. You know, understanding your history and heritage. Because the badge has been taken off a shirt, does it mean that it doesn't exist anymore? It's an iconic.
But I can see both sides to this. I'm sure you can as well, Chris, because you've worn that badge and you've spoken to those people who you know that are obsessed with the sentiment of that badge. And look, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but there's two sides to it, isn't there? That, like Wilkin says, there's nothing constant but change, and people are afraid of change. And then also, you're the one who studied the sports directorship course and is all about the rebranding and so on. But the cynics might say, well, hold on, you sort of invited 12 people to talk about it.
Yeah, and again, there are learnings. There are things that we could have done differently. There's no doubt about that. But you're also trying to keep it under wraps as well, and it's difficult to control people.
You know, to keep 12 people.
Yeah, and also, you know, you commit to this 2 years ago. We didn't then know that there was going to be a pandemic, and you launch in the middle of a pandemic, and people thinking, well, it's not the best timing. But people don't know how far in advance you have to plan things. You know, in March this year, we've signed off our jersey for next year. You know, that's how much time you have to put into it. But look at it, as John said, people don't like change. You learn a lot about yourself. You know, I realised I'm probably tougher than I thought. You know, to make that step. Again, I was the face of it, but there was a whole group of people who believed that it was the right thing to do for the club. And if we're guilty of anything, he's trying to make us better, trying to look forward, trying to.
It's easier to accept if you're a Wigan fan because you've made the decision and you are Wigan. You know what I mean? Rather than a sort of a faceless director in a corporate box upstairs.
Yeah, look, but you know, I think for the first time in 20 years, I was under the pump. You know, I'm completely aware of what people were saying, that this is all on me. But you know, this is it's not an easy position. My job, you're going to upset people. Yeah. All that I will say is that everything that we do is made with the best intentions. People will make the same choices as me if they had all the information on a table. Unfortunately, people don't have that information. And I always say that about a signing, or whether a player's coming or going. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
If all the information's there and you got rid of the cards, the answer's there, and everyone will come up with the same answer.
How much did Ian question you at the time?
Well, he backed the process, and he wanted to go through with it. But he's he's the ultimate traditionalist. He collects memorabilia. He's got an incredible collection of rugby league memorabilia. But he has two young sons who understand the social climate that we're in, and they. I'm not saying they convinced him, but they had a real influence on what we were doing. But Ian understands it. I often joke. Ian is really particular about ties. Really particular, yeah. But he takes us a long time to sign off a tie, longer to sign a player. It's so important. But now he's really comfortable with a skinny tie. But it took us a long time to get to that level. So he's having to change and adapt. But
the game's evolving.
Absolutely.
So look, Kris, various different challenges, and more recent ones as well. Jackson Hastings, the transfer saga that's been going on there. There's obviously in the news as well, the Tony Clubb racism court cases, things. This stuff keeps you busy, and it's the variety is the spice of life. You've certainly got some of that.
Yeah, I was kind of saying before that in the past there's probably been conversations that have happened between clubs and managers, and it might be two or three weeks before anything's leaked out. No, I found out at the same time as everybody else, which is on social media. I woke up this morning to George Williams leaving Canberra with immediate effect. I found out the same time as you guys. So a lot of what we have to do now is reactive, and it's you have to. I'm not suggesting that speed is the most important factor, but you have to act quick, but you have to act responsibly.
And how quickly did you act to get George Williams straight back?
well, it's not. It's a very live situation, and it's understanding everything that goes with that. It's a challenge. But I'm not holding anything back. I'm having to dig into all this like at the same time everybody else is.
Where do you see this going then with this career? Because I mean, if someone had asked you 20 years ago, would you be doing what you're doing? You probably wouldn't have had any clue that you'd go this far.
I don't know. I have the conversation with my chairman, quite often. Obviously, he's getting older as well. We've got a new shareholder, so there has to be successions, just like the successions with players and squads and academy players, etc. So, we're not doing our job as a business if we're not looking at what's happening in the next 5 and 10 years' time. So, I'll certainly be in it for a little while longer, but ultimately, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
One thing I wanted to ask you as well is the news of some clubs having their academy licenses taken away. What did you make of that?
Well, I don't know the reasons why some clubs have had the applications rejected. I know the criteria for getting them, and I know what we put into our document. I understand the rationale that the rugby league will use for removing some of the academies, which is there are not enough players in the game. There are not enough junior players playing rugby league. If you look at the under-15s and under-16s, there's probably 2,000 players in each of those age brackets. Each year, 200 of them players are taken into scholarships, which is 10% of the playing group. In other sports, typically it's between 3 and 5%, which enters an elite pathway. By reducing the number of the academies, the RFL's rationale is that it's actually protecting the grassroots and the community game. Our playing pool, our talent pool, is just not big enough, and we need more players playing the game.
How do we do that? I've been obsessed by this. How do we? Well, let's go back to the badge, right? You want to entertain and engage young people. The sport has got to feel exciting to young people to watch. But how do we get them engaged? I was similar to you. I was just brainwashed by rugby league. I went and watched first live sport. I went and watched. As soon as you get into that, it's easy, isn't it? But how do we get young people involved?
They reckon you need to get a jersey on a kid by 8 years old. If he's on there, then he's in for life. Yeah. The challenge that we've got is we're competing against so many other things nowadays. We're competing against phones and tablets and gaming, and you know, my son who's 11 used to love coming to games with me. Now, if he's got a match on the Xbox, you know, and that's a worry for me as somebody whose rugby league's his life, that my son would rather stay at home. You know, so we've got some challenges ahead. How we do it, I'm not sure.
We need to create more superstars like the Wigan team of the 90s for me, because that's what got me in the shirt. I can only talk from my experience, but I probably wouldn't because my dad played, but would I have been as interested if I didn't see Andy Farrell, Fran Botica, Henry Paul playing for Wigan? Maybe not, I think. But then that's a bigger argument about salary cap and creating superstars and how we market the game.
But it also, Flash, it goes back to our early conversation about the flamboyant player.
Yeah,
you're only a superstar if you can do the wacky things what no one else can do, you know?
And they're being diluted.
Well, the ballsy stuff's what gets you interested, isn't it? You know, it got back to 101 rugby league tries and a kick. You know, that video, I was obsessed with that video as a kid. There's a try in it, Peter Glynn for St Helens, chips over, gets it back, chips over, gets it back, scores. Yeah. Right, and it's just, like, you just, like, I'm not saying that that's what we need, but there's things that get the hooks in.
Yeah, but Nike aren't going to give a contract to a player who's knocking 60 tackles a game out. They'll give it to a contract to some kid who'll do something wacky. You know, that's and I don't know how we unleash that. But I'm with you, Flash. Your kids need somebody, you know, probably in the last few years, Sam's as closest we've got to that.
Yeah.
And he embraces that, and I think he's like that.
But then it's very easy, isn't it, at the same time to look back with rose-tinted glasses to a different decade, to a different generation, and then not consider the sort of social and cultural landslides of gaming and all these other things which have nothing to do with rugby league. That is just, I mean, you see kids now and that's a thing, isn't it? I can't see that shifting and going anywhere.
No, it's not. And look, young people exercising, playing team sports, not existing completely online is a cultural time bomb that's just ticking away in the background.
Yeah. Look, I think as a sport, as a playing group, I think we need to make some changes. If I looked at the social media platforms of some of our players, even the more talented ones, a lot of them will be uninvestable, to be brutally honest with you. If you look through the pictures, there'll be pictures of nights out. If you look through who they were following, you know, we all know what we're saying.
I don't follow those accounts.
If you look at what they're liking, but these are what big companies are doing nowadays. They're auditing profiles to see, is this player investable? So we need a cultural change, I believe, in rugby league to take us to a different level. I love the Cristiano Ronaldo documentary where he's a gazillionaire, but he's still looking at ways to get better. And I'm not saying every one of our players can afford a pool in his house, but if I walked into some of our players' houses, would it look like the house of a professional sportsman? And by that I mean, if I open the fridge, what would be in it? Yeah. Am I falling over a foam roller on the floor? You know, has he got a good ice machine? Has he got a laptop? You know, I know Wayne is kicking off that some of his England players have not even got a laptop to watch the clips. You know, I think we need to make some cultural changes if we want to be serious about taking our players to a different level. We have a freebie mentality in rugby league.
Absolutely, yeah.
Freebie mentality. And if you know, of course I'll post that on Twitter if I get 2 free T-shirts.
Yeah.
The superstars of the game are turning down thousands of pounds if they don't believe in that product. So we've got, as players, we've got to make some changes. And as sport, people like us have to influence and drive that.
Yeah. It's powerful.
They need to know the value as well, I think. Fine.
Absolutely. 2
T-shirts cost £50 and they'll do tweets and posts with 10, 20,000 followers. They're worth more than that.
Again, devil's advocate, but social media and a number of followers is a currency, and that was something that was just never around even 10 years ago, was it? You know, and people, even more embarrassing than that is people buying followers and forging a currency, but that is a thing these days. You know, you got 100,000 followers on Instagram. That's bigger than having.
It's personal brand. It's
players.
Personal brand. Yeah. You know, how many? If you did this audit, how many of our players' personal brand is investable? Every single tweet that you put out there, you know, companies. That's what we need to invest in the people.
Does the future of rugby league worry you? Does it look bleak to you at all?
Look. We don't know the full impact of COVID yet, do we? But I think it just feels more significant for our sport at this time. on the back of a reduced TV deal.
Yeah.
You know, the impact of repayments on government loan, etc.
And when do they start, the repayments?
You 2023.
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
to start repaying that. We don't know the impact on the community game. How many kids have stopped playing through the pandemic?
Yeah.
And we don't know that. We don't know how many fans are going to return yet. We've got an indication on season tickets, but I think it'll be a long time before we're seeing full stadiums. So the next 2 years, to me, just feels really, really critical and important. I think we'll always have rugby league. It'll always be there, and we'll always love it. Where it will be is up to people like me. Is up to people like you. You guys promoting this game now. We all have a massive role to play. I think I see rugby league as sometimes as a self-harming sport. We criticise ourselves ridiculously.
Yeah.
But I think if we encouraged every rugby league fan to say positive things, it's an unbelievable sport with the people in it, the values in it, and I think we all need to realise that we all play a role in that.
Yeah,
we all play a role.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for coming in. We kept you
Loved it.
for long enough. Thank you so
great.
much. That's Kris Radlinski, everybody. Don't forget you can download all the podcasts wherever you get them from, and give us a little follow at Out of Your RL on Twitter, and we will see you next week.